Welcome all. In this video I will explain getters and setters. So we have here a class named rectangle, and we can use a class to create an own data type. So when we create a variable of data type rectangle, we can store the width and the height of the rectangle in this variable. Furthermore, when we have a variable of data type rectangle, we can apply functions to this variable. And in this case, we can apply a single function to this variable, namely the function area. And the goal of this function is to calculate and return the area of the rectangle. So to make use of this class, we can create a variable of data type rectangle. So therefore we have the type rectangle and then give the rectangle a name, for example, R. Yeah. So in this case, R is the variable name and rectangle is the data type. So now to assign values to the member variables, we can use the following syntax. So we can type the name of the rectangle, so R in this case, dot, and then width. And then we have to use the is symbol and the value that we want to assign to the width of the rectangle. Yeah, so we assigned now the value 5 to width. The same we can do for the height of the rectangle, and in this example we assign the value 6 to the height of the rectangle. Furthermore, we can apply the function area to the variable R, and therefore we have to use the following syntax. So we type the name of the rectangle, which is R, dot, and then we chose the option area. So we call the function area in this case. And do not forget to use the rounded brackets after the function name. However, we can leave the rounded brackets empty this time because this function does not require any inputs. And also note, this function returns the area of the rectangle, and to print it on the console we have to use it in combination with cout. So now if I run this program, you see it prints 30 because the width is 5 in this case, the height is 6 in this case, and 5 times 6 is 30. So imagine that we use the value minus 5 for the width of the rectangle. And now you see it prints minus 30 because minus 5 times 6 is minus 30. So yeah, the code operates correctly. However, minus 5 for the width is a strange value, and also the area should be positive. And the problem with this code here, what we have now, is that we can access the width directly, and also we can access the height directly, meaning that we can assign any value that we want to the width and the height of the rectangle. So to prevent this, what we can do is place the member variables under private. So these member variables are now placed under public, and what public means is that everything under public is directly accessible. So we have a variable R here of data type rectangle, and everything under public is directly accessible via this variable here. So if I type R dot here, you see area, height, and width. So height and width points to these member variables here, and area to this member function here. Yeah, so you see everything under public, so width, height, and area, is also listed here. So it's directly accessible by the variable R. So to prevent this, we can place the member variables under private, like this. So now you see an error here, meaning that we cannot directly change the width and the height here in the main function. However, the next question is, how can we now change the width and the height? And to do so, we create so-called setters. And setters are easy functions which allows us to change the width and the height in these member variables here. So to create a setter, we use the following syntax. So setters are functions, so we have to build them as a function. And setters do not return anything, so therefore we use the keyword void. And we start by creating the setter for the width. And the naming of a setter starts with set and then the name of the variable that you want to change. So for example, in this case, the width. So this is the function name of the setter. Then rounded brackets, curly brackets. And for a setter, we pass a single input. And this input we will assign to the member variable. So in this case, to the member variable width. So we define a single input of data type double, because we want to change the member variable width, which is of data type double. So therefore, we also have to pass a value of data type double. And here the name is W as the input. And the idea here is that we assign the value in W to the member variable width. So we can say here width is W. So again, we can call this function. We have to pass a single input to this function, and the input that we pass is assigned to the member variable width. So a same structure we can use for the height. So again, we name it set height. So the goal of this function is to change the value in this member variable here. Furthermore, we give it a single input, h, and the value in this input is being assigned to the member variable height. So when we go back to our main function, we can use these setters here. So by using these setters, we can change the width and the height of the rectangle. So what we can do now is type the name of the rectangle, and we say set height to change the height of the rectangle, and then we have to pass the value that we want to assign to the height of the rectangle. So for example, 5. So the same action we can apply to the width of the rectangle. So what happens here is that we call the function, so the set height function. We pass the value 5 to h here, and then in the function the value in h is being assigned to the member variable height. So therefore, into this member variable, the value 5 is stored. And the same holds for this function here. And in this case, for the member variable width. So now, when we run the code again, you see it prints 30 again, because the height is 5, the width is 6, and 5 times 6 is 30, and therefore the area that is being printed on the console is 30. However, note, when I now change the input to -5, it still prints -30. So this means that we still can make the width and height negative, which is not what we want. So we place the member variables from public to private, so it's not directly accessible anymore in the main function. However, what we see now is that via the setters, we can still give a negative value to the member variables here. So what we can do with the setters here now is to check the input of the function and check whether they are correct. And with correct, I mean whether they are positive. So the idea here is to check if input is negative, and if the input is negative, we throw an exception. So we make an if statement here, and we check if W is negative, and then we want to throw an exception. So what happens here, if I call the setter for the width, I pass a single input. And if the input is smaller than 0, so negative, then I will throw an exception. So then the function stops and throws back an exception. And if w is 0 or positive, then the value in w will be assigned to the width. So now the width is always positive. So to throw an exception, we have to make a type for the exception. So therefore we have to type class, then the name of your exception, for example, negative value, and then end with curly brackets and a semicolon. And to throw an exception, you have to use the keyword throw and then negative value. So negative value is the same name as you have used here above. So the same we can do for the setter of height. So we check here if height is negative and if age here is negative, then we also throw a negative value exception. So let's run this program again. So now you see the program crashes. So what happens here on line 45 is that we call the setter for height. We pass the value -5. So age here becomes -5. And -5 is smaller than 0. So the condition is true, meaning it will enter the if statement. And then it throws here a negative value. However, the exception is never being catched. And therefore this error is caused. So what we have to do now is place all these statements here in a try block in combination with a catch block to catch the negative value exception. So what happens here is that the code always enters the try block. So it tries to execute these statements. And if one of these statements throws an exception of type negative value, then it will jump to the catch block and execute this statement here. So it prints a negative value for width or height being used on the console. So when I run this code now again, you see it prints a negative value for width or height is being used. So when we make the height +5 again, you see now it prints 30, because in the try block no statements here throws an exception. So all the statements here are being executed, and then the program continues further after the try catch block. So we have implemented the setters. However, later on in my program, so after printing the area, maybe you also want to get the height of the rectangle. So what we could do before is say r dot and then width, for example. So we use this syntax to get the width of the rectangle. However, we cannot do this anymore because the width, so meaning this variable here, is not directly accessible anymore because we place it now in the private. So now to get the height or the width of the rectangle, we implement so-called getters, and also these are very simple functions which gives us back the value in the member variables. So let's start by implementing a getter of width. And again, the goal of this function is to return the value in width. So therefore the return type of the function is double, because we want to return the value in with, which is of type double, and therefore also the function must return a double. So the name of this function is getWith. So a getter usually starts with get and then the name of the member variable that you want to return. Then rounded brackets. For getters holds that you do not require any inputs. And the implementation is very simple. Namely, you say return with. So you simply return the value in the member variable. So again, the name of the function is getWith. The goal of this function is to return the value in the member variable with. And therefore we use return type double, because the with is of type double. And the implementation is simply return and then the value of the member variable that you want to return from this function. So the same we can do for the height. So the goal of this getter is to return the value in the member variable height. And the implementation is then like this. So if you go back to the main function and imagine that you want to get the height of the function now, you can say r dot and then get height. And also use rounded brackets after the function name because it's a function, so therefore you always have to use rounded brackets. However, since this function has no inputs, you do not have to type anything between the rounded brackets. Yeah, so this line here, or this piece of code, gets the height of the rectangle, and by using it in combination with cout, we print it on the console. Yeah, so you see it prints 30 because of line 59, which is the area of the rectangle, and 5 because on line 61 we print the height of the rectangle, which is 5, because on line 56 I assigned the value 5 to the height of the rectangle by using the setter for height. So that's it for this video. In this video we have seen getters and setters.